the Dark Lord whose name itself was cursed, the king of all evil. He was resting on his throne, holding his sword. The silent place was filled with dust and rolling rocks when a man wearing full armor crashed inside. He walked towards the throne, asking the Dark Lord to come out. The Dark Lord looked at him and said he had already come out. The man took off his helmet. He greeted him and casually told the Dark Lord, "I will crush you. For that is who I, warrior Furkan Strong, is." The Demon Lord pointed at him and called him arrogant. Furkan pointed back at him and told the Dark Lord to shut his mouth, but his words were cut off when a gushing power drove past him and exploded when it hit the wall. The Demon Lord summoned a dark orb on the tip of his finger and told Furkan that they should end this battle. He was weirdly stopping mid-sentence, so Furkan couldn't help but ask why he did that and told him to talk properly. The Demon Lord told him to shut up. He pointed his sword at the warrior and said there are these kinds of people and other types of people in the world. He asked him if he was some racist. Furkan glared at him with his turquoise eyes and told him not to mock him. He grabbed his pocket, saying he was the chosen one who annihilated evil. He took out a weapon, and with his brave, low voice, he said, "Behold, this is the legacy of the Great One and the sword of glory that shall eradicate all evil. The Holy Sword." Furkan was stoned when he saw he was holding a goblin axe and not the Holy Sword. He looked at it confusingly. The Demon Lord said the Holy Sword looks just like a goblin axe. Furkan halted the intense scene and said there was a misunderstanding. He chuckled awkwardly and said he took out the wrong weapon from his pouch that can store anything without the restriction of space. Furkan began to be dramatic again and took out his weapon, which he said was the real Holy Sword. He stopped, staring at the wooden staff. He threw it away and took out something sharper than the staff. He had drawn the legendary Demon Crusher. He threw it away and rummaged through his pouch, saying he needed something a bit smaller and powerful. But he took out a gun, a semi-automatic Judge of the Otherworld. The Demon Lord called him and asked if he was some sort of Doryman or something. Ho ho ho, even the Demon King knows Doryman. I believe in Doryman supremacy. Furkan did not stop pulling weapons and other items from his pouch and unconsciously made a mountain of treasure behind him. He pulled out the last thing inside his pouch, and no Holy Sword was found. The Demon Lord got bored watching him and told him to fight him with whatever he got. Furkan was shaking in anger. He realized that he lost the Holy Sword as he stared blankly at the Demon Lord. He blew an air out and said he was screwed. 30 years later, at the Forgotten Citadel, an adventurer entered the dungeon and was facing the Guardian of the Forgotten Citadel. The Guardian was named Zylok, and he said to the adventurer that he could not defeat him with his measly skills. The adventurer cut him off and slashed his sword at Zylok. Zylok fell to the ground after the attack. The adventurer looked at him and said the Guardian was a strong enemy. He was startled when Zylok talked back and said, "Thank you for the compliment." The Guardian's body evaporated in a blue aura and vanished into thin air. This adventurer was named Johnson. He and his comrades have embarked on their journey to find the Holy Sword that was said to have disappeared with the warrior long ago. They have fought countless enemies looking for the Holy Sword, just like this giant complaining that 3-on-1 was too much for him. Johnson roamed around looking for the others and hoping they were okay. He stopped when he felt an ominous presence behind him. He turned around and saw two grinning devilish faces. Johnson was relieved to see the mage and the archer alive. The mage said they caught a hidden true boss, Hergmark, but didn't give them much. The archer said they did not find the Holy Sword and thought they were completely off the mark. Johnson sighed and said it was unfortunate for them not to find any traces since he paid quite a steep price at the Thieves Guild for the map. The archer was confused and remembered Johnson saying he would eat grass stew for a while since he didn't have money. Johnson looked at them and said their journey was to find the Holy Sword, so there was no need for them to get happy or sad over a few coins because it was for the legacy of the great warrior. The archer told him to stop his nonsense and open his pouch. The mage flinched when he felt something. They all felt shivering fear down their body after feeling the overwhelming mana. The mage pointed at the door and said it was coming from there. They all went to prepare for battle, watching the door slowly open. An inhuman wearing full armor came out the door, gasping for air. The three were prepared for a battle when they got confused when the monster told them to run away quickly. Johnson was about to charge for an attack. The monster tried to stop him to attack him and explain everything when the blade of the sword pierced through his skull. A man with long blonde hair pulled the sword out of the monster's body. The adventurers frowned their brows, looking at the sulking beggar-looking man. Johnson pointed his sword at him and asked if he was a human. The man ignored him and kept murmuring that the Holy Sword wasn't there. He lifted his head, glared at them, and told them to bring him the Holy Sword. The adventurers were shocked, realizing he was the Wraith of the Holy Sword, the one who went crazy after receiving the curses of those who perished seeking the Holy Sword. He was called a cursed evil spirit who wandered to seek the Holy Sword. The mage told them they had to run away immediately. Johnson gritted his teeth, ignoring everything he heard from the mage, and launched an attack. Before the blade could even land, the man halted its trajectory using his bare hands and smacked Johnson's face with his sword's handle. Johnson tumbled and rolled from the impact. The archer had no choice but to release his arrow, which he calls an arrow that doesn't miss. The arrow that doesn't miss was deflected easily by the old man. The archer called him. If he forgot, his arrow didn't miss. The man looked behind him but saw the arrows lying on the floor. The archer took this opportunity to call the mage for a counterattack. The mage lifted his staff and concentrated a massive power on it. The archer screamed at him, saying he'd hit him also. The mage ignored him and said it was the pirate rules that they must abandon the stragglers. His face was smacked when the blonde man threw his sword at him. The mage lost consciousness instantly and fell to the ground. The archer was speechless, seeing how thrilling the scene was before, was cut off by a smack on the face. The archer looked at him. The blonde man was emitting a dark, ominous aura. He lifted his fist and asked if he had the holy sword. The moment the archer said he didn't have the sword, that was the last thing we heard from him. He dusted off his hand after stacking the bodies. Johnson woke up, staring at the blonde hair and deep turquoise eyes. He tried to get up, realizing this human had an unfathomable physical ability, and figured only one person fits that description. It was warrior Firkin Strong. He screamed that he was a fan of him and asked for a signature. Johnson was speechless when Firkin approached him, saying that warrior vanished 30 years ago. He blankly said that the warrior heroically fell in the battle after a fierce and bloody fight. Johnson asked why Firkin became like this and told him the world hadn't forgotten him. He did not finish his sentence because Firkin flicked his finger on his face, which caused Johnson to lose consciousness again. Firkin said the adventurer was yapping so much. He was now 56 years old. He remembered the day he abandoned his comrades and underhandedly survived. He said that the embarrassing warrior perished as soon as he lost its holy sword. A soldier of the lifeless army came to back up the others. The lifeless soldier screeched as the sword pierced its body. Human warriors were fighting them off one by one. Errol slashed his sword, shattering the skull to pieces. Errol looked at their mage named Vendel and told him to cast his magic now. Vendel sighed and said he didn't have any mana left. Rurik, the smallest among them, approached Errol and said the lifeless soldiers were swarming in again. Errol immediately went to position for the next wave. Rurik lightly massaged his back because it was hurting. Errol crushed their bones in one swing of his word. He flinched when he saw something ahead of them. A dark aura suddenly blew them and pushed them back. Then the dust cleared out, and they saw a familiar face. They knew he was there. The King of the Dead, the first knight among the 4 commanders of the Dark Lord, Wraith King, and the Nameless One. The Nameless One glared at them, explaining that he had a name. His words were cut off when Errol told him to shut his mouth. He removed his helmet and said he would not listen to an inhuman fiend like him. Errol faced him and said he would take the Wraith King down himself. Rurik looked behind and said to Errol that it wouldn't be necessary. They all looked back and saw a warrior walking towards them, Firkin Strong. Errol called him and told him to get there quickly. Firkin Strong apologized for being late and asked if he was having fun. The Wraith King chuckled and replied it was just starting to get boring. Firkin Strong said he'll have some fun with the Nameless One now. The Wraith King frowned his brow and said, "Wait, if you call me the Nameless One, isn't that my name then? It's contradicting." Firkin Strong blew an air out and said he'd call him the Named One from now on. He told the Named One to brace himself for the gift he had prepared for him and draw out the blazing, powerful sword. The Named One asked if he was holding a magic sword, and Firkin Strong said it was the Holy Sword. Firkin Strong continuously murmured the Holy Sword like a maniac. The man beside him was a farmer. He scooted away from him, thinking this man was crazy. The carriage stopped when the man in front told them they had arrived at the horrifying, cursed, dreadful valley that you can step into but cannot escape. Firkin Strong went down and commented that it has a long name for one place. This place is the lair of the Wraiths. The farmer on the carriage told him that the Wraith King was rumored to be living there. Firkin was surprised to hear the Wraith King was still alive. The man explained that the Wraith King was the King of the Dead and was called the Named One. The farmer asked why someone of his age wanted to go there. Firkin Strong said he went there to see if the legendary sword existed. The farmer was about to say something, but Firkin Strong threw the sword he was holding at him. He said he could have it, and when the man unwrapped it, he was surprised to see a magic sword. The veins in his face swelled from the sword's intense power. Firkin Strong told him to take the sword as his compensation and reminded him not to get his power drunk on the sword's power. The carriage went off with his laugh echoing around the place. Firkin Strong looked at the entrance and went inside to look for his holy sword. When he went inside, a lifeless wraith saw him and jumped at him with a screeching voice. He was stunned when a femur bone hit his head. Firkin Strong scolded him for being so noisy and asked if he had swallowed a foghorn. The wraith curled in fear while apologizing and said a living was not allowed to enter the land of the dead. Firkin Strong looked around and saw a bunch of wraiths surrounding him. The other wraiths screamed at him, telling him to leave their land. Firkin Strong looked back at him and told him to bring the legendary sword to him. But suddenly, one of the bystanders' wraiths tried to punch Firkin Strong, telling him to stop bullying the wraiths. Firkin Strong glared at him, saying he thought they could just talk things out, and swung the bone and shattered skull. Firkin Strong attacked the nearby wraiths one by one. The wraiths prayed as their bones got crushed. Those witnessing the scene were shocked and said they should be immune to physical damage. Firkin Strong faced the crowd and told them to come to him and meet Buddha. The terrified wraiths scram immediately out of fear. He looked at them while gripping the bone and said violence was always an effective communication method. He looked to his side when he heard someone approaching. A wraith was with someone wearing all black. The wraith bowed to the King of the Dead and asked him to relay justice. The kind of death still has that unerasable smile on his face. The king asked to reveal his identity. Firkin Strong figured the King of Death didn't remember him, so he said he'd help him remember who he was. He said they should have fun as they did back then and called him the Named One. The King of Death looked at him and remembered who he was. Firkin Strong looked at him and asked if he remembers him now. The King of Death chuckled and said, "How can I forget you?" Firkin Strong was the one who humiliated him and stripped him of his dignity in the past. Firkin Strong said he was beaten up because he did something wrong. He added that he is not a warrior anymore because he had given up on his name, Firkin Strong. The King of Death asked if he heard about an old man who swings a femur bone and beats up wraiths. He fiercely asked Firkenstrong if he came there to take him down. The wraith immediately sprinted away when he felt the tension between the two. Firkenstrong scratched his head, asking what he was talking about. He added that he went there because he heard that the sword was there. He glared at him and said the weapon that could turn the earth upside down was in the land of the dead. He pointed the femur bone at him and threatened to bring him the sword while he was still using words to communicate. The King of Dead said he was right about the legendary sword was in there. He approached Firkenstrong and said he would not tell him anything because he is a lich who has even transcended death. He moved his face close to him and said an old rotten corn like him could not annihilate what's already dead. Firken walks past him and says he will torture him until he begs him. The King of Death asked why he was looking for the holy sword he had used against him before. Firkenstrong said it was because he didn't have it. He asked what was the thing he didn't have. Firken said the holy sword. The King of Death chuckled and asked if the greatest warrior lost the holy sword. The King of Death teased him, saying not even a fool would lose the holy sword and basically calling him an idiot. He chuckled and said he totally caught him there. Firken got pissed, cursing the long tongue he had. Firkenstrong suddenly appeared behind him in the blink of an eye, saying they should communicate a bit. The King of Death bent down to evade his attack and asked what he meant to communicate. Firkenstrong blankly said it was a physical communication. The King of Death dodged all his blows, but Firkenstrong did not stop attacking him. When he swung the bone back and struck it straight to his shoulder, the King of Death was blown away a few meters from his original standing point. The King of Death whispered that Firkenstrong was no longer a match for him because they were in his territory, the land brimming with corpses, and summoned the gigantic Grim Reaper. He called the Reaper, pointed at Firkenstrong, and ordered it to harvest him. Firkenstrong started beating him with the bone, cursing him. The King of Death grunted and told the Reaper to move quickly. The Grim Reaper swung its scythe toward Firken's direction, but his scythe was caught barehandedly by Firkenstrong. He asked the Reaper if he wanted to chat with him as well. The Grim Reaper went silent for a moment, then slowly faded away, saying he would get going now. Firkenstrong took a big piece of the scythe and turned to look at the King of Dead. He leaped backward to make a distance between them. Firkenstrong said he'd count to 3 for him and had to bring the sword within that time. He counted 1, but the King of Death ignored him and used his power to levitate those glowing stones and threw them all toward Firken's direction. His eyes widened when he saw Firken unscratched from his attack. Firkenstrong counted to 2, but he ignored it again. The King of Death summoned a sword to his hand and said he would show him. He suddenly got to his knee, showing the rumored legendary sword. The King of Death was screaming inside his head because of the humiliation he was experiencing. The wraiths watching them couldn't believe their king would be this cowardly towards a mere human. The King of Death cursed him and thought Firken was a monster before he returned as a devil. Firken squinted his eyes and asked if that was the legendary sword. He replied that this was the rumored legendary sword, the longsword. Firken was not buying anything he said. He counted to 3, which shocked the King of Death. He spilled that they really didn't have the legendary sword, and they made that rumor to attract adventurers to their place because it was their only way to harvest fresh souls. Firken asked what was the point of telling him all that. He sighed and withdrew the weapon from his neck, saying there was no point in annihilating him. Firken was about to leave when the King of Death asked if he would not harm him. Firkenstrong said he could take care of him anytime he wanted. But he did not come there for that because he went there to check if they had the holy sword. He started walking and said it would be a waste of his strength for a useless thing like him. The King of Death chuckled, jumped up, pointed out where the exit was, and told him to leave quickly. He was stoned when Firken grabbed his shoulder, asking if he could bring back to life who died, a resurrection, in short. The King of Death chuckled and said he's not a divine dragon and said summoning a soul, and having it possess another body would be possible. And that is where a lich came from, like the King of Death. Firkenstrong chuckled and asked how he had not thought of that before. Firkenstrong stared at him straight into his eyes and ordered him to make a lick. An armored man was walking deep in the woods with a person wearing a black cloak. A group of men with swords suddenly came out of the bushes. The two stopped and saw they were surrounded by the unknown people. The armored guy was about to ask if they were bandits when an arrow struck him in the head. His body dropped to the ground unconscious. They greeted them and introduced themselves as bandits. He ordered the man wearing a cloak to hand over everything they had. They were shocked when an ominous voice called the bandits fools. The armored guy suddenly rises with overflowing power in his body. The armored guy slowly got up, saying he didn't have anything to give them. The bandits were terrified to see a corpse come to life. One of the bandits told them to get a grip and attack the guy wearing a black cloak. But when his sword touched his head, it shattered into pieces. The bandit was stunned when the cloaked man said he made a bet with the sun, who would take the clothes of bandits first. He said that the sunburn set the bandits' clothes on fire, burning them to their bones. He started screaming that this was the way to burn and purify all evil living in this world. The bandit was shaking in fear when the cloaked man created a tremendous blazing orb and told them to burn their bodies to break their shackles of atonement and sins. The bandit fainted from fear while the others ran away from them. Firken toned down the fireball slowly. Firken took off the hood and checked the armored guy. The armored guy asked why he did such a dramatic scene just to catch one bandit. Firken told him not to worry because the fireball was empty inside. He pulled the arrow on his head and took off the helmet. The King of Death chuckled, saying he's a lick and won't perish. The unconscious bandit was having the most peaceful nap. The King of Death took his clothes to disguise as a bandit. He told Firkin that he doesn't have to disguise since he's famous for being the Wraith King. Firkin looked at him and said he'd love to see what the churches nearby would do after knowing the King of Death was here. The King of Death said he was not scared of the church. Firkin told him he must be in a good condition until their contract was fulfilled. The Wraith King sighed and had no choice but to follow what the warrior said. Firkin told him he wanted to make that person a lick back in the land of the dead. The King of Death said doing this was a different level of work since every life was cursed with oblivion when they perished. He added that it was a curse and a blessing, and Firkin would commit a taboo for breaking that order. He asked Firkin Strong if his best friend was the person he wanted to reincarnate. Firkin said that he didn't care and all he cared about was to find the Holy Sword. Firkin Strong rested his arm on his shoulder and said he needed his best friend because he was the guardian of the Holy Sword. Firkin looked at him and told him if he'd help him resurrect his friend, he promised never to appear before him again. The King of Death asked what would happen if he refused. Firkin Strong gripped his palm tightly, which he understood quickly. The two shook their hands after agreeing with the deal. The King of Death took out his book and said he'd need a heart that belonged to the dead, an eye that could find souls, and more. Firkin said he didn't know everything he was saying and told him he would guide him to where they could get those. The two stopped when they finally arrived at the ancient tree forest called Elves Garden. The garden was filled with ancient, beautiful trees. Firkin asked where he could get the essence of the forest. The King of the Dead explained that resurrection requires a price, and the person he was trying to revive was a great wizard, so a dog or a pig wouldn't suffice. A gigantic bear was roaming around the Elves Garden. There were a lot of soldiers surrounding the bear. Some of them were hiding behind the trees. Some were on the branches of the trees and bushes. They observed the bear, who is also called the guardian of the forest. One of the soldiers said this bear is their target for the subjugation. The soldier beside him suggested to attack it immediately. He scoffed and called him a fool, but he did not expect his comrade to charge towards the bear. He tried to stop him, but it was too late. His sword broke when it landed on the bear. The bear stood up and glared at him. The bear roared and sliced his head with his claw. The head of the soldier dropped and rolled on the floor. The bear's deafening roar echoes around the forest. The soldiers were alarmed and had no choice but to take out their swords. They were about to attack the bear when someone stopped them and told them there was no need for sacrifices. The soldiers looked at the mysterious man and wondered if he was a mercenary. The man who suddenly appeared was a wizard named Adol. The bear was growling as it paced back and forth, looking at Adol. The soldiers noticed how the atmosphere changed when Adol showed up. Adol lifted his hands and gestured to make the bear come at him. The soldiers' nostrils flared how Adol taunted the bear. The bear got angry and charged towards him. Adol rolled his hands to a fist and positioned himself in a boxing stance. The bear attacked him with his claw, but Adol tilted to his side to dodge it and threw a punch on the bear's side. The soldiers were amazed at how Adol managed to hit a fatal spot of the bear. Adol dodged the bear's paw and counterattacked it with a kick to its head. The bear lost his balance for a second, so Adol took this opportunity to throw another attack. The bear has a fast reflex, so he attacked Adol when he shifted its body. Adol managed to block it on time but was pushed back from the impact. He clicked his tongue. The soldiers took out a bag of popcorn and wondered why the mage wasn't using magic. The other soldier said standing equal to a bear with a bare fist was his magic. Firkin and the King of Death were walking deep in the woods. Firkin told him to be careful because they'd enter the forest tenders. The King of Death scoffed and said those underhanded elves could throw arrows anytime soon. Firkin Strong said it was not just he was concerned with, but also the master of the forest because that master has a terrible temper. The King of Death chuckled mockingly and said Firkin Strong would be the worst one there since he destroys everything he comes across. The King of Death flinched when he noticed the dread face of Firkin Strong. He curled out of fear, expecting Firkin to hit him, but Firkin Strong just walked past him. Firkin Strong removed the hood and stared at the dead ancient trees. The King of Death wondered if a giant beaver did this, but Firkin said forest tenders like a beaver wouldn't do this. They noticed an arrow landed on the ground. They heard marching horses and soldiers approaching them and realized these people had done this to the forest. Firkin remembered that humans and forest tenders were at war but didn't know it would be like this, to the point that human soldiers traveled all the way inside the forest. One of the soldiers told them to stop and ordered the two to put their hands up. The soldier asked them to reveal their identity and how they got there. The King of Death blankly said they got there by walking. Firkin stopped him from muttering any more idiotic words and told the soldier they were passing wanderers. Firkin said, however, I thought this place was the land of the forest tenders. Could I ask how the army of humans got to this place? The soldier explained that it was the Emperor's command to push through and reclaim their ancestral land. The soldier lifted his hand, causing the archers to aim their arrows at them. He told them that they would respond with martial law if they didn't return now. The King of Death chuckled devilishly. He got pissed, so his dark aura was unconsciously radiating from him. Firkin cursed him and told him not to make a fuss. He calmed the King of Death and told the soldier they'd return now. When the two started walking back, the soldier halted them, saying the guy with a weird laugh matched with a wanted bandit. The soldier said he'd need to inspect his face. The King of Death asked Firkin's permission if he could crush this human. Firkin didn't think the human king would do this to the forest tenders. One of the soldiers suddenly called their commander, pointing to the bear brought by Adol. Adel dusted off his hands, telling the commander that he finished his mission. The commander couldn't believe a mage could take down this bear alone. Adel was known as a man who took down an orc with his bare hands. Adel said it was an easy job for him and asked who the corn-looking guy was. Firkin said this bear wasn't easy to take down and assumed the mage was strong. The soldiers approached him and blocked his face with the sharp spears. Firkin told them to be careful not to ruin his beard. The commander told Firkin that he should have left earlier and asked if he had any last words before he perished. Firkin stared at him for a second and said his last word, dodge. As soon as he said that, an arrow pierced through the commander's chest as well as the other soldiers on the ground. The humans grunted and screamed from the pain they felt. The remaining soldiers warned the others and told them to get into formation. The elves had arrived and was the one who threw those arrows at them. The woman elf ordered her subordinate not to leave a single one alive. The elves released the arrows and struck the soldiers. Blood hissed from their body as their scream filled the forest. When the soldiers noticed it, their mages cast a barrier to protect themselves. One of the mages noticed their commander was shot and asked if he was okay. The commander grunted and said he had let his guard down, and the elves could wipe them out in their condition. The commander told them to hold out for the time being while he called for reinforcements. The soldier was calling the commander, but he made the horse run fast. Firkenstrong clicked his tongue as he watched the incompetent commander leave his subordinates. He tilted side to side to evade the arrows and calmly told them to dodge it. The King of Death went to him with arrows stuck in his body. He asked Firkin when he would be allowed to eradicate them. Firkin told him to dodge the arrows. The two looked at Adal, who was blocking the arrows easily and could even grab the arrow with his bare hands. The King of Death pulled the arrows and wondered why that young man was good at dodging them. Firkin murmured that looking at Adal made him see his young self. Adal suddenly raised his hands, surrendering, and said he was just a mercenary. The woman elf approached them and said that submitting was not a choice for them because lifeless bodies awaited those who had earned the forest's wrath. The King of Death chuckled and asked them why the dark elves were there. The elf woman dropped her mouth open angrily and said, "What dark? An elf is an elf, but you say dark elf." The woman elf called him a racist and told her subordinates to shoot them, but he flinched when Firkin told him to stop. The woman was surprised and wondered how the old man got there. Firkin asked if she did not remember him, which made the woman elf pissed. Firkin explained that he used to let her ride on his shoulder and play with her when she was younger. The woman told him to stop his nonsense and shot 2 arrows at him, but Firkin just smacked the arrows with his bare hands. Firkin told her to calm down and listen to him. The woman told him to shut his mouth and infused more power into her arrow. She said that human broke their non-aggression pact and invaded their land. She added that their rage would not be quenched even if they tore them apart. Firkin jumped and flipped his body. He said he had no choice but to clear the way for conversation. He placed his palm on the bear. The bear suddenly glowed. Steam came off when the bear returned to his true self. The bear transformed into a human named Gom. The woman cursed Firkin and told him to take his hands off Gom. Firkin chuckled because they were now having a peaceful conversation. The woman got worried seeing Gom's condition. Firkin looked at her and said they had to listen to him first if they didn't want to lose Gom. The woman did not hesitate to release an explosive arrow at him and said they don't negotiate with terrorists. Firkin sighed and said that Gom nearly perished from that explosion. The woman was shocked at how the old man survived that arrow imbued with her mana. Firkin called the King of Death and said they should educate them about conversational manners. He warned the King of Death not to obliterate them. The elves did not hear what they were saying as they were already infusing their mana into their arrows and releasing it. The King of Death created a barrier to protect them from those gushing arrows. He chuckled and placed his hand on the floor, injecting tremendous power to the corpse near him. At the human army outpost, the general was angrily screaming about why the man brought a horse there. The general was humbled when the man bowed and said it was a zebra. He was surprised when the commander suddenly appeared with a faint voice. The commander knelt and said some suspicious people ambushed their troops. The general asked about the suspicious people he was saying. The commander explained that an old man and a strange assailant wearing a hood invaded their land. The general rubbed his beard after hearing it. He looked to his side and asked Orin, wearing white armor, if that suspicious person could be the person he was looking for. The commander was surprised to see a person wearing white armor because the person who wore this was directly under the king's command. Orin asked the commander if the old man he mentioned had blonde hair, blue eyes, and a scar across his face. The commander said yes and added that he might be a corpse by now because the elves' arrows would have turned him into a needle cushion. Orin said that the elves would have been massacred by now if he was the man he was looking for. The general asked if that old man was that amazing. Orin told the general that knowing too much could harm his life. Orin called the commander and told him to guide him to the last place they saw the old man. At the shrine of the forest tenders called Tree of Udun, the elves gathered in the spring to show the dangers of the forest. The elder said he could see it. He was seeing an elf holed up at the cook house. The elf said that was not what he was supposed to see and showed him the female elf earlier named Downham and Gom captured by the humans. The elder grabbed his staff and said, "You finally come crawling out, Firkin Strong." When Orin and the commander arrived at the forest, they roamed around to see if any of them survived, but none were seen breathing. Orin picked up a dirt and tasted it. He flinched when he tasted dark magic. The commander asked if he said dirt magic. Orin explained it was earth polluted by mana. The commander asked if the old man was a dark mage, and Orin replied that he was a great hero. He added that the old man was the master of the great holy sword before and the greatest rotten pro. The commander was shocked to realize that the old man was the legendary warrior with the holy sword. Orin grinned and apologized for talking too much. He slashed the sword at him, slicing his neck. The commander clenched his neck while blood was hissing from it. Orin said it was a secret, so he had to be erased. The commander cursed him and said he was the one who talked. Orin was humming as he walked away and said he just happened to hate those people who come back alive all by themselves like him. Orin had confirmed that the old man, his idol of the past, was working with the Wraith King was true. A carriage made out of dark magic cages the elves from earlier. Downham cursed Firkin, telling him to release the barrier and fight her fairly. Downham continued to scream and called Firkin strong names. Firkin was getting pissed and asked the King of Death what was the spell that shuts people up. The King of Death chuckled and said he did not know Firkin Strong was a softie to let these elves live instead of obliterating them. Firkin clicked his tongue and said he was going easy on the female elf because she was the baby daughter of his friend who lived there. Firkin said he'd use them as a card to obtain the essence of the forest. He suddenly got mad when he remembered these elves had the powerful essence of the forest because they didn't pull it out when he fought the Dark Lord. Firkin Strong chuckled and added that he'd crush these elves if they would not give him the essence of the forest. Downham heard them and cursed them. Firkin Strong told her to keep quiet because the adults were talking. Adal sighed and asked if they could let him go since he was not one of the elves. Firkin Strong asked how he got there. Adal was watching Firkin Strong and the elves fight when a walking soldier's corpse ordered him to go inside the cage. Firkin said it was unfortunate for him, but the young man had to wait until the negotiations were over. Downham scoffed and said, "Do you think the master of the forest would give you the essence?" She added that it was not something an outsider could dare even to discuss. Firkin told them they should start praying that their negotiations would go well. If not, he would blow the entire forest and steal the essence by force. Downham slammed the steel, calling him a decrepit old human and saying he was full of bluff. Downham was surprised when Gom spoke, saying it was not a bluff. He added that the old man was the warrior Firkin Strong. Downham pointed at Firkin, asking if this beggar-looking man was Firkin Strong. Gom nodded and said he was the warrior who disappeared with the holy sword. Downham couldn't believe Firkin Strong had become like this. Gom knelt and said, "How could I not recognize the person I've shared life and death?" He bowed his head as he greeted the great warrior. Firkin Strong sighed and said that was a bit too much. Downham asked him to stand up, but Gom ignored her and asked Firkin why he only showed up now. He looked straight into his eyes and said that the world was in chaos when he disappeared. Gom said that the remaining forces of the Dark Lord threatened the world, causing those who used to be allies are now at war. Gom told him to look around and said the human king, his once sword friend, did this to their forests. Gom grabbed the rail and said this chaos would have been prevented if he had been there. He begged Firkin Strong to stop the war and end the chaos in the world. Firkin bluntly said that he refused. Gom asked why, and Firkin said he only came there to take the essence. He added that it was their situation and he had nothing to do with it. He said to himself that he knew things would be annoying if he would butt in because he has a history with the human king. Downham cursed and called Firkin a trash. Firkin Strong said that if they keep being loud, he'd put a gag on them. They continued to move forward, but the kind of death notice Firkin suddenly stopped. In the blink of an eye, a gigantic root went in their direction, which hit the King of Death. Firkin looked around and saw more of it coming. He leaped backward and to the side to dodge it. Firkin asked if it was all right. The King of Death said he was all right. Firkin clicked his tongue and said he was not asking if he was okay, but the barrier. He chuckled when he saw the carriage was broken and empty. Firkin told him to chase after them and looked up. He greeted his old friend, who was standing on a tree branch. It was the elf elder. Firkin asked if he had come there, worried about his daughter. He smiled, cracking his knuckles, and said they should have a conversation to catch up. The roots dug their way to the ground and attacked them. The King of Death chuckled as he chopped them off. He wondered if this was some kind of a tentacle video. Firkin punched the roots as he told him not to mind this and to find those who escaped. He grabbed it and tore it apart like a paper. The King of Death chuckled and said he'd do as he said. Firkin looked at him and told him not to think of running away because he'd go looking for him instead of the holy sword. The King of Death suddenly was surrounded by dark smoke and told him not to worry about it because he'd be the one who would harvest his soul. Firkin said that this ugly lick was just not trustworthy at all. He turned to face his old friend and said he should have a nice little chat. The elder of the forest was named Udyr. Udyr walked slowly towards him, saying Firkin Strong was the Dragon Slayer, a guide of light. Firkin commented he was also mannerless. Udyr told him to stop adding weird nicknames. Udyr looked at him from head to toe, saying Firkin had gotten uglier and older. He asked, "What even are you now?" "The strongest of the jobless bums." Firkin Strong stretched his arms and asked what he wanted to say to his friend he met after 30 years. Udyr glared at him and said he was no longer an elder but a great elder, the master of the forest. Firkin smiled and congratulated him for getting promoted. Udyr smashed his staff at him, telling Firkin to use formal language. He swung the staff side to side, but Firkin avoided it. He told Firkin he was at least 100 years older than him, and the Confucianism dragon within him trembled. Firkin laughed, telling Udyr he talks like an old man, but he stopped when the roots caught him off guard. Udyr smacked him with his staff hard, which threw him off the ground and rolled a few meters away. Udyr lifted his hands, glowing with his aura, and made the roots charge toward his direction. He said Firkin crossed the line when he brought a dark mage and attacked the forest tenders. Firkin scoffed, grabbed the big root, and said the ones who attacked him first were the forest tender. He slammed the root at Udyr, which almost threw him off balance. Firkin sprinted toward him and said his skill hadn't changed. When he threw his fist, Udyr blocked it using his staff. He asked why he came there after 30 years and if he was also with the human king. Firkin grabbed his staff, saying he didn't have an interest in their war, and that he came there for the essence of the forest. Udyr was relieved when he heard he was not with the human king, but he was stunned when he said he wanted the essence of the forest. Firkin pulled the staff and kicked Udyr on his abdomen. Udyr grunted in pain, calling him sacrilegious. Firkin strong sighed and said he would borrow the essence and return it quickly. Udyr said Firkin had gone senile after getting older and asked how he ended up like this. Firkin pointed the staff at him and told him to stop being stingy. He glared at him and said, "Let's go over this nicely." Udyr said that he would share now. Udyr cast the roots at him, saying he would split him into 2 shares. Firkin strong expected this reaction from him, so he jumped and leaped upwards. Udyr screamed and asked why he wanted the essence as he created a glowing, powerful orb. Firkin crawled up and said he was trying to revive someone. Udyr said what he was saying was nonsense. Firkin used the staff to push himself up, and when he was mid-air, he dropped the staff to the orb. Udyr was stunned to speak after hearing he'd revived the one who used to be their center long ago. Firkin flipped and slammed his ankle to his skull. A seed on a palm suddenly broke. Udyr was alive inside the spring. He crushed the seed as he grunted and thought about what Firkin was trying to achieve. A broken wood that resembled Udyr was broken and filled with cracks. Firkin realized the Udyr he fought was just a clone. He blew an air out and said he was getting a post-fight clarity. He stretched his body and wondered how to deal with the aftermath when he revived his best friend. He suddenly remembered the King of Death and thought he would have caught those who escaped by now since he was the Wraith King. The King of Death was chuckling as he walked with a magic chain on his hands and was escorted by a group of elves. He whispered, saying, "As I thought, I hate elves." Firkin was looking for the King of Death, and along the way, he noticed a hidden reverse mana release restriction magic circle. Huo, that's a long name for a trap. The elves must have dug these traps to make it hard to notice. It is a trap in that the more you expel mana to escape, the more it is released in reverse to restrain yourself. So using mana is a no choice when you're trapped here. Firkin Strong noticed the steel wire connected from tree to tree before him. The wire was coated with neuroparalytic poison. He looked around and saw the familiar mask on the grass. He cursed the Wraith King and said he'd be demoted to a Wraith Count for getting caught by these measly traps. Firkin had to bust in because he would need the Wraith King for the resurrection. Firkin squatted and rubbed his knees, saying his joints worsened as he grew older. He sprinted like a supersonic jet. Orin was sitting on a branch of a tree. He smiled after he found the warrior he had been looking for decades. At the Tree of Udun, there was an underground prison located at the root of the tree. An elf was escorting the King of Death to his cell. He pushed him inside the cell and locked him up. He called him a dirty dark mage. He chuckled and said his name was the King of the Dead. He was surprised when someone said he was also the Wraith King, the named one, and a lick. The person who said his name was also one of the prisoners. He said the Wraith King looked different than he expected, more grandiose. The King of Death asked who he was. Adal greeted him and introduced himself. He added that he knew him because he heard it from his teacher. The King of Death chuckled and said he was the idiotically captured mercenary. He chuckled again, seeing Adal gets captured in a cage again. Wraith King sat down and told Adal to learn to say no when someone grabbed him. Wraith King asked if his teacher was a scholar or a mage because his teacher knew the King of Death. Adal said he didn't know much about his teacher, and one thing he was sure of was that his teacher was a lick. The Wraith King chuckled and said there were only 12 liches, and none of them had a human as their disciple. He added that Adal was not even a dark mage on top of it. Adal said he is a mage. Wraith King to stop spouting nonsense. Adal looked at him and said that the Wraith King did not know that there was a 13th lick, his teacher. Wraith King said there was no lick born after the 12th. Adal said he didn't care if he wouldn't believe it and asked if he wanted to cooperate with him to escape this place. The King of Death said his suggestion would be great, but they had this magic restriction cuffs. Wraith King started explaining how the handcuff works, but Adal ignored him. He grabbed the chain and screamed as he tried to tear it apart. Wraith King chuckled, saying breaking it with his strength would be impossible. He was stunned when the chain suddenly cracked in half. The King of Death was speechless, wondering how a mage was this physically strong. Adal looked at him and asked if he would join him in his plan of escaping. The King of Death chuckled and said he was an interesting human. He added that he also had a plan called the Warrior Plan. He chuckled and said that guy would smash everything here and there to get him. He told Adal not to waste his strength and to wait for Firkin Strong. Right after he said an alarm was sent off, the elves were running, alarmed by the sudden attack. Wraith King chuckled, saying, "Speaking of the devil, he's here." The elves couldn't believe a single human was attacking their castle. Firkin Strong smashed his fist against the castle wall. The wall was filled with cracks and ended up falling to pieces. Firkin told them to call their manager over. Firkin Strong walked calmly. The elves couldn't believe a human could break the wall with few hits. The elves couldn't move, looking at Firkin Strong. Firkin told them they shouldn't be nervous, for he came to talk. Udyr came out and told him he was still headstrong, just like before. Gom and Downham watched their master and Firkin on their guard. Firkin figured he was talking to the real Udyr, and they should clear up their misunderstanding first. Before Firkin could even open his mouth for another word, he was smacked by the head with Udyr's staff. Udyr said the discussion would be pointless. Blood started dripping on Firkin's forehead. He shoved the staff away and asked if it was a house rule to swing first when someone asked to have a chat. Udyr said he had nothing to talk with him after causing a mess in the forest with the Wraith King. Firkin Strong sighed. He grabbed Udyr on the shoulder and told him they would talk. He said he needed the forest's essence and the Wraith Count. Udyr immediately said he would not hand him those. Firkin said he knew that the essence was important to them, so he asked him if it was more than the lives of the forest tenders. Gollum and Downham were shocked to hear Firkin threatening their master. Udyr lifted his staff, imbued with his power. Firkin stopped him by holding it. Udyr was distracted when some of his men were flying and got thrown. Firkin looked at the elves on the floor and said he had nothing to do with it. A shadow figure appeared in the smoke, apologizing for interrupting their conversation. The smoke cleared and revealed Orin's grinning face. He said he had some business with the Great Warrior. Firkin looked at him blankly, asking if he came alone. Orin smirked and said he would meet the Great Warrior, so he should show his respect and bring some friends. Udyr knew Orin was the first Night Order and asked if the Human King wanted to put an end to it. Firkin called Udyr and said, "Hey, gimme essence." He offered to make a deal that if he gave him the essence, he'd clean up these humans for him. Our main character just extorts his friend for the essence. A man moved and called out for a checkmate. The eye-patched man chuckled after winning the game. His opponent's side chuckled as he cursed him. His opponent, who has parted bangs, asked the eye-patched commander if he had enlightenment in the war. The commander grabbed the cup on the plate held by his servant and said their 3-year war was ending. The parted bangs guy said he heard a rumor that the First Night Order had been deployed. The commander said they came there for a mission. He sipped his cup and said deploying them was their highness' will to finish the war. The guy said he shouldn't enjoy himself like that and suggested sending an army as early as possible. The commander said he was confident because they're the First Night Order. He explained that they are soldiers who are all armed with magic weapons and individually have stronger weapons, each stronger than 1,000 men. They're veiled beings that not much was known, so they only have to pray and eat cake. Since these knights stepped in, this war's result was as obvious as watching fire. The elves were getting slaughtered by the knights. Udyr gritted as he saw the forest tenders falling one by one. Gom, the bear, roared loudly and attacked the knight. The knight easily blocked Gom's paw with his shield. Gom whined, wagging his hand from pain. Downham commanded the elves to release the arrow. A massive explosion occurred from the impact of the arrow and the barrier created by the knight. One of the knights was a magic user. The archers got anxious after seeing their attack gets blocked. The mage's aura suddenly burst and caused the floor to crack. Some of the debris flew from the force. Udyr took a deep breath and told the forest tenders to hold still. As soon as he said that, the ground trembled, and a gigantic wooden creature emerged from the soil. A sword lady walked calmly towards Udyr. He stopped, and a powerful force came from him that cracked the ground. Orin looked behind and asked if he was okay not to help them. Firkin was scratching his head, watching frustratingly at the elves. He sighed and looked at Orin. He asked him why he was acting so friendly and who he was. Orin apologized and introduced himself. He bowed and said he received an order from their majesty, the emperor, and he came for him to guide him to the emperor. Firkin pointed at him, called him arrogant, and reminded him that he was the guide of the light back in his days. He clenched his fist and told him to leave him be for once. Firkin added that he badly wanted to bonk him in the head. Udyr, on the other hand, screamed at Firkin, "Are you really going to keep watching? You call yourself a warrior?" Firkin nodded and told him to give the essence first. Orin drew his sword and launched at Firkin. He said he wanted to fight with his idol properly and swung the sword at Firkin. The tree behind Firkin was cut in half after dodging the sword. Orin told him to show his dignity as a warrior and pierced the sword straight at Firkin, but he evaded it on time. Firkin was surprised when the blade touched his cheek, so he grabbed his arm tightly. Orin couldn't move his arm from it. Firkin looked at the sword and said, "Wow, your sword looks pretty good. Where did you get it?" Orin could feel the overwhelming strength just by this, so he drew another sword out on his right hand and struck Firkin. Firkin blocked it using his arms, and the impact pushed him back a few meters away from his standing point. Speaking of points, Firkin badly wanted to smack his head at this point. Orin grinned, lifted his sword, and imbued it with his power. He told Firkin he was not done and to take this attack on. He released the attack with full force. Firkin stood up and blocked it with his hands. He grunted. T was quite strong. He deflected the attack and said it does sting a bit. Orin sprinted over to his idol and said playtime was over, but he froze when he felt this fear. He immediately leaped backward away from the warrior. Firkin was looking at him with deadly eyes and holding a fist back. Orin chuckled and said he was surprised by his pernicious aura. Orin figured Firkin didn't plan to be serious and asked him to end it. Udyr stepped back and ended up bumping into Firkin. Udyr was panting, gasping for air. Firkin noticed it and teased him for being tired. Udyr hated to admit it, but these human knights were monstrous, especially the one who fought with Udyr, the sword lady. Udyr said that this knight was strong enough to be comparable to Firkin in the past. Udyr added that he was not saying this because he was getting crap on. Firkin Strong suddenly remembered that they used to fight with their backs against each other before. Udyr added that Firkin was used to be normal during then. Firkin said he was not normal back then but hasn't gone insane once. Orin told them that they should start wrapping this soon. Firkin sighed deeply and said he wanted to bonk him in the head. Udyr called him seriously and said he'd give him the essence and bonk them in the head. Orin laughed after hearing they would get bonk in the head and thought they were joking, but he froze when he sensed Firkin behind him. Orin grunted when he blocked Firkin's fist. Firkin told him not to hold it because he might break. The first Night Order captain, named Commandos, was talking with Orin, his vice captain. Orin said he heard about a piece of information on Firkin's location from a farmer carrying a magic sword. The farmer told him that he saw an old man with blonde hair in the Wraith King's lair and walked out of the lair unscratched. Orin said they lost Firkin at the Citadel last time, and he got information that Firkin was heading to the elves. The captain couldn't get off his mind about the farmer with a magic sword and said it was strange. Orin asked if he called him for this, but the captain said he called for him to give some advice. He warned Orin that Firkin Strong was completely different from those he had faced until now, and said his strength alone wouldn't be enough. Orin told the captain there was no need to worry since Firkin was a frail man, drunk in the glory of his past. Captain Command said he had seen Firkin's war and wasn't called a warrior because of his holy sword but because he was incredibly strong. Orin's knee was shaking after blocking that powerful punch. He said it was ridiculous for him just to bonk him in the head, but he was stunned when Firkin bonked him, asking if it was ridiculous for him. Orin grunted in pain as he rubbed his head. He was surprised by the power from Firkin's empty fist and said he had underestimated the warrior. Orin was surprised when Firkin came at him again for another bonk. Orin countered-attacked and said, "You said you're gonna hit just once." Firkin evaded it and said once it was too soulless. He was about to land his fist when a tip of a blade almost pierced his eyes. He dodged immediately, cursing at the sword lady. Orin sprinted when he saw his comrade, told him not to get on his way with his fight with Firkin, and slashed his sword at him. Firkin deflected their blades and suggested they should work together instead. Firkin said he was not doing it for himself but for them to succeed. Firkin bent down to dodge his attack. Orin said seriousness doesn't exist within Firkin Strong. Firkin reached out his hand and said people don't like too serious people. Orin was able to slash his arms and side without Firkin dodging it. Blood hissed out of the wounds of Firkin. Orin inhaled and said, "Remnant of the past, please do disappear into history," and slashed his sword straight at Firkin Strong. He froze, dumbfounded, when the sword he was holding disappeared. He lifted his gaze and saw his sword was grabbed by Firkin by his hands. Firkin said calling him a remnant of the past was mean and said he has no skills and no manners either. He added Orin had to start over from the basics and said dual swords don't work for him. Firkin lifted the sword, checking it out, and said his sword was nice, but the person holding it wasn't. He said many high-quality magic swords had been blended into it and figured the human king was trying to make a new holy sword. Orin got pissed and tried to attack Firkin, but it was easily blocked using his own sword. Firkin looked at him and asked if he was confident to win against him, sword versus sword. He felt his bear was cut by a blade coming from his back. It was the sword lady from earlier. Firkin looked at him and said they were in the middle of a manly 1v1. Orin chuckled as he realized the man before his eyes was still the great warrior. Udyr, from a distance, scolded Firkin for putting a crack on their wall. Udyr said, "I told you to bonk him in the head, not to blow up the castle wall." Firkin called him a stingy man, saying they should build it again. Orin couldn't believe how relaxed Firkin was and figured they weren't a threat to Firkin. Orin lowered his sword and sighed in annoyance. He called Shaq, the mage knight, and said they were withdrawing, which surprised them. Firkin asked why they were running away. Orin said he's quick to give up on things. He admitted that it was his first time coming up against a higher wall than his captain like this. Firkin said it was quite an honor for him and said nobody could leave without his permission. Orin smiled and said they already prepared a mass recall spell ahead of time. A lightning speed arrow was released by their arch to the sky. Orin said they would fire one monstrous shot. Firkin looked up and was surprised by the powerful arrow that came from the sky. He grunted but managed to block it. He cursed when he saw more of it coming and said, "You said it was only one shot." Orin laughed and said once was too soulless. One of the knights was about to hit Gom, but luckily they recalled on time. Downham was huffing for air and noticed the knight had disappeared. They looked around but did not see any trace of them. They had teleported to a cliff. The archer called their vice captain and said it was unexpected for him to fail. Orin said he became a frog in a well when he faced Firkin. They managed to give him a scratch, but piercing Firkin would be impossible for Orin, even with the archer's arrows. Orin knew they wouldn't win against the warrior with all of their power together. Orin had declared that their mission had failed and would return to their base immediately. Meanwhile, Firkin was done dealing with the arrow shower. He looked up to check if there were more but saw nothing and called them underhanded humans. Udyr approached him and asked if he was okay. Firkin said his wounds would heal with a spit and asked if the item was ready. Udyr told him not to worry because he'd keep his promise and asked why he needed the essence of the forest. Inside a basement, somewhere no one knows of, the young Firkin Strong was asking his best friend if he was really trying to create a lick. His friend shushed him and told him to lower his voice. He said he was curious about liches, so he's doing research about it. Firkin said, "Whenever you get curious about something, you're not stopping until you're satisfied." His best friend's name was Vendal. Due to his curiosity, he also ended up creating the Holy Sword. Vendal said the Holy Sword is a magic sword that eats away the wielder's mind and body. Vendal asked if he felt the sword creeping toward him, and Firkin replied that he used it very often and carried it in the pocket dimension pouch to prevent it from eating him. Vendal told him that even if he used it often, he would end up getting encroached upon and eaten by the Holy Sword. Firkin confidently said he was strong enough for it, but Vendal cut him off by saying he would end up exploding into pieces because the overcharged mana would cause osmotic pressure, and his body wouldn't be able to handle the mana surge and explode. Firkin stared at him while he explained those and still understood nothing. Vendal levitated the book with his magic power and said if he could understand the principles of liches, they could be able to solve Firkin's problem of the physical body. Liches' muscles, blood vessels, and nerves are all controlled by mana, so they don't perish from mortal wounds. Firkin looked at his friend, amazed by how smart he was, so he asked how he figured out his theory. Vendal blankly said that he dissected the Wraith King. Firkin figures out why Vendal asked him to capture the Wraith King alive. Firkin suddenly asked if he would stay looking like an old hermit. Vendal looked at him and figured he hadn't removed his disguise yet. He lifted his hands and removed the disguise. After a few seconds, the hermit-looking man turned into a young man. Going back to the forest, at the Tree of Udun, the elves were restoring their castle. Udyr burst out laughing after hearing Firkin's explanation. Firkin laughed along with him. Udyr asked to confirm if he was on a journey to revive Vendal. Firkin nodded and said yes. Udyr asked to confirm again if he wanted to turn Vendal into a lick, and he replied yes once more. Udyr started laughing again, but the others remained silent. Udyr sighed when his daughter interrupted him, saying he shouldn't listen to the warrior's nonsense. Danum continued scolding his father. Firkin picked his ears while listening to her. Udyr stopped her and firmly said that he had to fulfill his promise. Danum was about to complain, but his father asked Firkin why he wanted to revive Vendal after 30 years. He said that Vendal had already found his slumber in the Ashen Land and asked why he wanted to break his slumber and curse him by turning him into a lick. He asked if they had bad blood between them. Firkin told him not to look into people's personal lives and just do a clean trade. Udyr insisted that he explain his intention and asked if it was because of the holy sword. Firkin glared at him and did not answer. The elves whispered that they heard a rumor going around that the warrior lost his holy sword. Udyr had confirmed the rumor was true based on Firkin's reaction and said that he was going too far for it. Firkin said, "Holy sword. Yeah, I'm looking for it from the nest of the ancient dragon, the Grey Mountains, Jelthazonos, to the garden of the Spirit King. There's no place I haven't searched in the long 30 years. Firkin clenched his fist and slammed it on the table, causing it to crack and shatter into pieces. He said that he couldn't find a single piece of evidence through those years. Udyr squinted his eyes, seeing his expensive table into small pieces. Firkin said he only wanted to find his holy sword. Udyr exclaimed that he was not in his right mind and said the sword possessed Firkin. Firkin took his sword out and told him to keep his promise before he ended up not right in his head. Udyr stood up immediately and told Firkin to follow him. Udyr guided Firkin into a place covered with gigantic vein-like roots and entered a door with its border engraved with ancient writings. The magic chain was unlocked by an elf that set the King of Death free. He chuckled and said his warrior plan went well. The elf walked toward Adol and glared at him with a scathing stare. The elf said this man wouldn't be released because the Wraith King was the one Firkin told them to release because he was unaware the elves captured Adol. Wraith King chuckled and said he didn't need to release the young man because he could come out on his own. The elf was shocked and dumbfounded after seeing his prisoner bend the rails barehandedly. Adol told the elf that he left the chain in the cell. The elf told them to stop since the young man was still their captive. Wraith King glared at him with his creepy aura. The elf told them the young man could not leave. Wraith King chuckled and suggested something. He knelt and placed his hands on the floor. A patterned glowing circle appeared that was imbued with his power. He said he'd give the elf a nice gift instead. Adol stopped the elf from getting near the Wraith King and told him to watch over it since he wouldn't get to witness magic like this often. Firkin looked around the area and said he didn't know a space like this existed inside the Tree of Udun. He replied that they hid it to protect the essence from bastards like him. Firkin defended himself, saying he's more gentlemanly. They stopped when Udyr said they had arrived. They looked up into a face engraved into a tree, the cadaver of one of the first men, the tree giant. Firkin said, then the essence of the forest would be inside there, right? Udyr replied, saying probably. Firkin was amazed by the sight and agreed with him, but he froze when he realized something. Thank you for watching, guys. I hope you enjoy this manga. Have a good day.